Now, as far as we know, there was no plea bargain in this case. Now, I want to ask Dino, who was a prosecutor, now a defense lawyer, that surprise you?
No. As the statutes are written that apply to this case, this is a fairly low-grade felony, relatively speaking, elevated to a felony from a misdemeanor by virtue of the fact that he's alleged to have left the gun in easy reach or access. So I think with the fact that the death of a young boy resulted here, the prosecution was probably constrained not to offer Mr. Mevic a misdemeanor plea, which may have brought little or no jail time.
Well, here you have the legislature going to the trouble to pass a new law. This is the first case under that law.
Right.
The prosecutor would almost be thumbing his nose at the legislature if he said, well, they passed this new law, but I'm not going to enforce it.
True, and what happens is we've had the experience with the death penalty in New York. None of the New York City DAs are fond of it. It becomes a situation where when you finally do invoke the law, you're subject to criticism from the defense and perhaps others. Well, why my guy? It's selective prosecution. So they have a decent guy here, but they probably figured we have to, the statute is there, we have to use it. If we use it with Mr. Mevic, who arguably is not a bad person, made a bad mistake, we're not going to be subject to selective prosecution arguments when we use it later on against someone else.
Well, he looks almost pitiful sitting there all by himself, but his attorney is trying to make a case, and she continues addressing the jury.
When Lewis Sr. traveled after 2001, or in September of 2001, to Florida, he loaded his car up, and he came down, and he brought the firearms with him. A single man, or a man coming down by himself, he rented his apartment and kept the firearm under the couch. He was in a ground floor of an apartment and felt more secure to have that firearm there. As I've already told you, you will find out that Lewis came down in the summer of 2002, attended Largo Middle School the year of 2002, ending in May of 2003. Everything was fine. Mr. Mevic will tell you these are obedient children. They've never given him problems. They followed the rules. He has been set out some strict rules, and they've been good kids. So Martin comes down in 2003. On the morning, and what you will hear, you hear about this gun safe. It was not a gun safe. It was a safe that a coin collection was kept in New York. After this incident occurred, it was brought up, well, why didn't you put the gun in the safe? And Lewis Mevic said, I probably should have. That's when the whole idea of locking the guns up in the safe came about. But it was never used by Mr. Mevic to store the firearms. It was used to store a coin collection given to the boys by their grandfather. Lewis will tell you he grew up in a home with guns. His father hunted. He hunted as a child. He grew up in New York and Pennsylvania. You were told not to touch the guns, you didn't touch the guns. His children were obedient. He told them, never touch a gun. Repeatedly, it is not a toy, you don't touch it. So when the boys moved down with him, and both boys are now living with him in 2003, he has gone to New York because at this time, the house is going to be sold in New York. He flies down with the boys, and his brother brings some of his other belongings. His brother had driven up and brings some of the belongings, one of which is a safe that gets put into a bedroom. He's in the process of getting Lewis back into school, and he has to get Martin into school, and he wants Martin to get into the same school, and Martin actually has to sit out a few days because initially Martin wasn't allowed into Largo Middle, but ultimately they let Martin into Largo Middle. So Martin and Lewis can go to school together. It was important. On September 5th, you will hear that Lewis Mevic is working part-time at Home Depot. On that particular day, and the reason he works part-time at Home Depot is so that he can be at home with his kids. He doesn't want to leave them unsupervised for long. Maybe an hour after school. And he usually left after they would leave for the school bus. So on September 5th, he has to be at work at 10. That means he has to leave his house at 9:30. The boys take their book bags, and it's a rainy day, and he says, hey, you guys want to ride to school? No, we'll just catch the bus. School bus is just down the block from where they live. They take their book bags, they head out.
So the defense is going to have to argue, if there's going to be a defense here, that he took reasonable steps to keep this weapon away from these children. Then take a break, we come back, and as defense counsel wraps up her argument, she tries to make that point. The defense counsel for Louis Mevic doesn't have much ammunition as she makes her opening statement to the jury. But she does have one point that she can make, and she makes it now as she wraps up her argument, and that is that the legislature in New York dealt with a situation by requiring a gun lock, and he did it when he lived there. He moved to Florida. The Florida legislature hadn't chosen in its wisdom to require gun locks, so he didn't use them.
He finishes up, doing some things. He leaves. When he leaves his apartment complex, he can see where the bus stop is. There are no children at the bus stop. What does he think? Kids got on the school bus. He goes to work. There is a very strict rule in this house. You do not have children, anybody over when I'm not home. And as far as Louis knew, his kids didn't. Again, they were obedient kids. He never had problems with them. Goes to work, and then he gets the call. He gets the call at 1:45. Come home quickly. And you'll find, ladies and gentlemen, that he thought that they had gotten burglars out of that they had caught a burglar out of his house, because when they had first moved down here, he believed someone had come into his home and taken money. That he had been a victim of a residential burglary. Never reported it to the police, but believed that that had occurred. Another reason he kept the firearm where he did. Of course, obviously, very disturbing when he gets home and finds out what has occurred in his home. You will hear, ladies and gentlemen, that Louis cooperated fully with the police, searched the home. You're also going to hear that it took the police officers some time to find that firearm, even though that firearm was put directly back in the place where the boys said they retrieved it. You're going to find, ladies and gentlemen, and what the evidence will show is that you will hear Louis Mevic's statement that he gave to the police, and he will tell them over and over, I never guessed, I never thought this could ever happen. They never expressed an interest. It never occurred to him, ever. The boys never handled it, they never loaded it, they never shot it, they never saw him do anything with it, except maybe take it out in New York and clean it. And in New York, trigger locks are a requirement. In Florida, they are not. He was concerned when they were little, and were unable to follow directions, and might have not understood the gravity of this case, the situation. But you will hear that Louis trusted his sons to understand. He trusted them not to touch the gun. And he had no idea